Google Cloud Next happened a few weeks ago. So if you've missed it, there was a lot of effort for making this one of the premier events from Google. There was a lot of focus on AI and computing. You can read all about it in their blog. But one of the things that was really interesting and was probably didn't catch the limelight was the fact that we had ADKs. We had the announcements for Agent Development Kit. And Agent Development Kit was mentioned as an open source framework that simplifies the process of building sophisticated multi-agent systems. Now, what this really means is that you have a mechanism to basically say that you can have multiple agents that can interact with each other, and those agents can then build you something that you might want to build in a production environment. It is also deployment agnostic, model agnostic, and in a lot of ways more free than some of the other frameworks that are out there. Apart from that, there were a lot of other announcements as well, but I am focusing this time on just the Agent Development Kit because this is what we're going to be building on for this entire tutorial. Okay, so there was a second blog which was also written on the same day, which spoke in a lot of detail about ADK, and I'll include that in the description so you can read more about it. You can see how easy it is to build these very simple chatbots, and it comes pre-built with a UI, which means that you don't have to necessarily build the front end. You get this pre-built front end, which has voice and video and a bunch of other tools. It also interacts with Google's inbuilt tools like the vector store, like Google Search, and a bunch of other things. So with that in mind, I'm going to go into the tutorial or what we are focusing on today. Now, to really take a step back, what we have to do is to understand that the idea of building a dataset explorer, basically a methodology to ask questions to an AI-based or an LLM-based system, isn't really new. In fact, some of the early efforts on this was sometime a while back. It was about the Earth Engine Dataset Explorer, and I think the Earth Engine GUI notebooks kind of encompasses that. There's a Dataset Explorer page, and you can click on that, and you can find more information on what the Dataset Explorer is. It was early efforts at basically using vector embeddings, a data store, and then embedding the questions and asking. That's how fundamentally how this Dataset Explorer was designed to work on. You can look at the notebooks to find more or less the details on these, including the embedding generation notebooks that's already included in this. I'm also going to include this in the description, like I said. There were efforts to also build at the same hackathon or at the same conference. We built something called you can actually look at it right now. If you go to the Earth Engine community catalog, we used the Vertex AI Agent Builder to also build a search bar or a search interface, which you could then ask questions to. For example, tell me about land cover datasets in the catalog. And what this will do is it has the capability now to search across the main catalog, the community catalog. At the point we started, it was just the community catalog, but we can now ask it a question, and what it's doing is it's using the corpus of information that it has to basically figure out and summarize all of this information, including links to the data set that was available. So this was super useful, right, for doing a lot of the interaction that people wanted to do with search, because it allowed people to do natural language queries. You can ask it based on the thematic focus you have or the question you're trying to solve, and it would try to give you an answer, or it will try to point you towards data sets that matches those kind of interactions. So what exactly changed with ADK? With ADK, the idea was that you could now ask these questions, but you can also connect it with these agents that can do a Google search, for example, that can enrich the data set with additional pieces of information outside what we have here. This search bar, for example, is what we call traditionally a RAG, right? It's a retrieval augmented generation mechanism through which the data is being returned to the end user. But it has a limited scope on which it is looking. It cannot go outside to the internet. It cannot search, which is good and probably bad at the same time. Good because it cannot hallucinate. It cannot go outside the scope of what was given to it. but bad in the sense that if there is updated information about those data sets, it also cannot find those, for example. So with that in mind, when ADK was released, there were two people who basically, colleagues and friends, who wrote this article, Christopher and Eric Abelson, who wrote this article about, and actually did a presentation on this as well, on how to build AI agents. And they were using Agent Development Kit for the first time. Basically, what they ended up doing was creating these agents and sub-agents that could do things like Google search. They could actually go and to the Google catalog query, and they can look for like keywords or a bunch of keywords and try to find those, try to find those pages and then enhance it with using the web search and things like that. Now, the idea was that you can simply go into their GitHub repo. So you can actually go into the GitHub repo right now. You will notice that there's a G agent folder and there's a .n file. You can actually get this API key, by the way, by visiting AI Studio. So you can replace your Google AI Studio API key with an API key that you get from AI Studio. And that's all you need from running this. You go and clone this basically, and they've given the step-by-step instructions. So if you wanted to follow along, you can basically go in and choose how you would run this, and you can run it using that interface. You can basically get a UI. And let me show you what I mean by that UI, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to clone this right now. We're going to go here, and I am going to copy this. I'm going to go into my control panel, and I'm going to CD out a little bit, and let's clone this, right? So let's clone this right now. If I can remember that we're supposed to use git clone, not just clone. Okay, so we can now go into the CD, agentic assistant, and if I do an ls, you will notice that there's a, like I said, there's a folder called G agent, there's a license and requirements. Of course, you don't see the .n file because it's a hidden file, so you can just do an lsla, and you can actually see that there are hidden files that you'll be able to basically run on top of, so I'm going to clear this out. Okay. And I'm going to look at the env file. So you notice here that there are two things that are on here. So one is the fact that there is a Google API key. So what we're going to do is we're going to get an API key. And like I said, it's very easy to get an API key if you go to AI Studio Google. If you don't know where that is, just Google the term AI Studio Google, and something should pop up. So I'm going to let you sign into this. And once you're signed in, you'll notice that there is a button that says Get API Key. If you click on the Get API Key, I have a bunch of API key already there. But if you wanted to create a new API key, you can just click on Create API Key, and you can choose the project that you wanted to work on. I'm going to choose a project of my choosing. You will have your own projects. I'm going to choose a project that I want to work with, and I'm going to create an API key in the existing project. And I'm going to copy this API key. Now, this API key will be the one that you will be utilizing for all of the runs that you're going to do. Of course, I'm going to delete the API key post-recording, but you can mint your own API keys for use here. All you need to do now is go back and paste your API key right here, hit save. We have to install a few things for ADK to run for the first time. Two of the recommendations that I would recommend everybody to do is, one is going and installing the Google Cloud SDK, and because the Google Cloud CLI or SDK, because it basically brings all of the application credentials, everything else that you need to do for things to run properly in a much better way. And also, more importantly, because the tutorial that I'm going to show you next is going to deal with using your Google Cloud credentials to actually access Vertex AI, and it is going to talk to a discovery engine API, and it's going to do a bunch of things there. It can also talk to your Google Cloud bucket using the same credentials. So it's really, really useful for you to get this set up. So I would recommend doing that. Next, if you wanted to, and this is going to be an important step, just look for the term Google ADK. And if you go to the Google ADK, then you will notice that there is a pip install Google ADK. So now I have already done this, but you can actually go ahead and remember I'm still in that folder, so I can just do pip install Google ADK. You'll notice that it says that my requirements are already met because I've already installed it. All you need to do after you set the end file and after you have basically put your API key there is just type ADK space web. And this is where I think it gets really, really interesting. And this is what makes it so different from the other frameworks that are out there, because like I said, it's batteries included. It comes with this framework that's pre-built. And now I can go to localhost 8000. As you'll notice here, it'll actually tell you to go to localhost 8000, right? So it says you can access this here. Now you go to localhost 8000. You have an agent that's already selected. On that folder, there was only one agent. And I can just ask it, hello. You will notice that as I type hello, it'll tell me what this is meant to do. So I can say, can you tell me datasets to study Nightlights? You will notice that as I send this, it's calling on an agent. And you can actually click on this to see how the events are being passed. It's first passing this to the Earth Engine search agent, right? The search engine, what it's doing, it's searching by those keywords, and it's trying to see if there are datasets available. It's also doing a web-based search, so it's also looking for a web-based search, and it says, it's basically asking me questions now to refine this. And I said, well, choose anyone that is daily or monthly frequency. So you can actually refine the search even better. So if you choose this, it does remember, because you're in the same session. So it does remember. So it goes back to the search agent and it starts searching this. And it's going to get the details for this data set. Okay, so it's still running the search agent. And now you'll notice that as I'm switching between the events, you'll notice how the handover is happening, right? So now it's gone to the web search agent. So what it's doing is it's going out to the web and it's looking for this data set in even more detail. So it can actually enrich and add a little more context to this answer. And as that is completed, you'll notice by this checkbox that has been completed and the new events have been added. It got the results. It's then going to go and hopefully have a response for us really soon. So this is all the response that you can see that was being returned. We gave it some instructions to basically talk about the research readiness of this program, right? We gave it a priority list. We told us what to report it on. So it went through this entire flow, and you will notice that you can actually look at the entire flow by going through the different events that it happened. And then it gave us this summarized response. And this summary now has things like the temporal coverage, it has the spatial resolution, usage recommendations, and so on. A couple of things to notice here. It has a direct link to this because it's actually searching for that when it's using the search agent, right? So even if it finds another data set that's out there in the web that looks and sounds familiar, if it does not match up with this link, then it won't necessarily return it. It also tries to give you an example that comes with it, that's also from the page. And you will notice here that it's using all of the content that's already on the page, right? So it has contents on like descriptions and bans and terms of use and a bunch of other things. So it's using those things to get to the pixel size, it's getting to the bans and what's included there. It's getting to the terms of use and descriptions and a bunch of other things. So that's what's being utilized to generate this summary. And that was what was created, and that was the blog that was presented on ADK a couple of days ago. And that was fascinating, right? It was one of the few fun examples that you can try on your own and you can build on your own. And if you look at the code, right, if you actually look at their code is actually pretty simple. If you look at agent.py, you will notice that there's a code to actually search at the developer site for these keywords. There is also some code to basically like fetch the web page and fetch the content of the web page, so it can do that. There is a search agent, so it's basically, like this is the GE search agent, so passes user request to the Earth Engine catalog search tool. And you will notice here, this is how the flow works between each other, right? So there is a web search agent which uses Google search, there's a web fetch agent, and you can use all of this along with the instructions that have been given to create that summary that you were looking at, and this is the system instructions or the instructions that were basically being passed to this root agent. This is the main agent that's doing all of this orchestration, this synchronization. Okay. So a couple of gotchas, right? The gotchas are going to be when you're going to do a complicated search, when you're going to try to do mixed context, like if you're looking for urban heat island effect, or if you're looking for things like the urban boundary linking poverty to, let's say, nightlights, for example. That could be one of those pieces where this idea, because everything starts with a query, may not work. So right now, it does work because it can break the query into either keywords and can do some sorts of semantic searches. Now the endpoint here also works with a lot of keywords, so it works really well in figuring out like what those could be. But as you can imagine, this can be a limitation. The second limitation that I can see, it's not really a limitation, I would say it's more of a consideration, is that this is an active query system, which means that it requires us to go fetch those web pages from Google Earth Engine catalog every time I make a query. Which means that if I make these query X number of times, it's going to make those requests X number of times to the catalog. While that might be completely fine for a robust page like a catalog, it might be a burden for certain websites. If you're building this for a much smaller website, that's not really designed for scaling up for like high volumes of traffic and things like that. And as you can imagine, if we do this in deployment, right, you can be in a scenario where there's hundreds and thousands of people who are utilizing this. We really don't want to overload the mechanics, by too much. So there is a couple of things that could be improved, that could be changed. And like I said, there's different approaches of doing things that could be changed. So in the next video, I'm going to show you a similar implementation, but what I'm going to use is Vertex AI Agent Builder, which is similar to the search bar that you saw. You remember the search bar where we actually typed in, tell me about land cover data sets? We're going to use the API that basically runs this to get to all of the information. We're then going to use Google search to basically enrich that information and then show you what that agent looks like, or what that flow actually looks like. Similar to this, we actually borrowed from their system instruction to see how far or how close we can get to their summarization method as well as our summarization method. So I'll see you in the next one.